Something happened to them in the quiet. Not the quiet you gave them deliberately, not the silence deployed with intention or the distance chosen as a response. The quiet that arrived naturally, inevitably, when the dynamic finally exhausted itself and you stopped being available in the way you had been available. When the orbit you had maintained around them gradually, then completely, ceased to organize itself around their gravitational pull. In that quiet, something began running in them that had not been able to run while the relationship was active. A process that required the specific conditions of your absence to start. That could not have initiated while the presence of you, reaching, hoping, calibrating, offering, was still providing the input the management strategies needed to stay operational. The process is called reckoning, not the dramatic cinematic version, not the single moment of clarity that arrives with orchestral swell and complete transformation. The other kind. The slow, resistless, arrives on its own schedule kind, that begins as a vague discomfort and develops over weeks and months into something that cannot be dismissed or deactivated or summarized away. The reckoning with what you actually were, with how smart you actually were, with how clearly you saw them, with how much value you brought to every dimension of the dynamic, intellectual, emotional, human, that they were too defended to fully receive while receiving was available. And with how they treated you, measured against what you deserved. That measurement is what regret is made of. And the avoidant is currently in the middle of it. Start with the intelligence, because this is the dimension of your value that the avoidance regret tends to surface around first, before the deeper emotional reckoning arrives. And understanding why illuminates something important about how the avoidance system processes loss. The avoidant, almost universally, has a highly developed relationship with intelligence. Not exclusively intellectual intelligence, the broader, more textured intelligence of someone who has spent significant time alone with their own thinking, who developed, through the necessity of self-reliance, a rich interior life, who processes the world through a sophisticated internal framework that most people do not have the patience or the solitude to develop. This sophistication makes the avoidant a demanding audience. They are not impressed easily. They see through performance quickly. They register the difference between intelligence as display and intelligence as the actual, lived quality of how someone thinks. The difference between someone who knows things and someone who genuinely understands things. Between someone who produces the right answers and someone whose mind actually moves in an interesting direction. You are the second kind. In every category that the avoidant's refined discernment uses to assess this. The way you saw things, the specific angles of your perception that did not replicate anyone else's. The quality of your understanding when you encountered something complex, not rushing to conclusion, holding the complexity, allowing the full shape of a thing to emerge before categorizing it. The specific, rare, immediately recognizable quality of a mind that is actually alive to what it encounters, rather than simply processing it through existing frameworks. The avoidant registered this, in real time, throughout the relationship, with the specific, almost reluctant appreciation of someone who is difficult to impress, finding themselves impressed. And then, in the operation of the pattern, they managed even this, redirected the appreciation, filed it under the general category of she's smart or he's perceptive, flattened it from the specific, significant, rarely encountered thing it was into a general positive attribute that the management strategies could process without requiring the full weight of its significance to land. In the silence, the flatness fails, the specificity returns. The mind they knew is no longer present to be managed, which means it can no longer be abstracted into a category. It exists now only as memory, specific, detailed, irreducible to summary, and memory of this quality does not flatten. It stays dimensional. It keeps revealing new facets in the spaces between other thoughts. It keeps arriving in unguarded moments with the full weight of what it actually was. A specific, extraordinary, entirely irreplaceable mind that is no longer here, that the avoidant had access to and managed like a given. Here is the specific texture of the regret around your intelligence that the avoidant carries. It is not simple missing. It is the particular uncomfortable recognition of what they withheld in exchange. You brought your full mind to the relationship, to the conversations, to the problems, to the understanding of both of them that you offered so consistently and with such specific accuracy. You were not holding anything in reserve. The intelligence you brought was the actual thing, not performed for effect, not calibrated for impression management, genuinely offered because that is how you engage with things and people you care about. And in exchange, the avoidant, who had an interior equally rich, equally worth offering, gave you the managed version, the version that was careful, that revealed in increments rather than fully, that held back the best of what they actually thought and saw and understood, because holding back was the default, and the default was never consciously examined. You gave them your full mind. They gave you the edited version of theirs. And now, in the aftermath, the avoidant is sitting with the awareness of that asymmetry in a way that is genuinely uncomfortable, because they know, at the level of honest self-examination, that the silence eventually makes unavoidable, that you deserved better than what was offered, that someone who brought the quality of intelligence you brought deserved to be in a genuine exchange rather than a one-sided offering. The regret is partly about the loss, partly, and this is the part that runs deeper, that takes longer to surface, that is more costly to sit with, about what you were given in return for what you gave. Now the dimension of your value that arrives second in the reckoning, but ultimately hits harder. The avoidant is understanding, in the quiet, how precisely you saw them. Not the version of themselves that was offered for public consumption. Not the competent, self-sufficient, together on the surface presentation that most people received and accepted as the full picture. The actual interior. The defended places, the loneliness inside the self-sufficiency, the specific qualities and contradictions and genuine depths that the architecture was built to keep inaccessible. You saw through it, not aggressively, not with the invasive quality of someone determined to get past the walls, which would have produced the immediate withdrawal response. With the specific, patient, accurate attention of someone who was genuinely curious about what was actually there, rather than what was presented. Who noticed the real things without making the noticing a project. Who understood something true about the avoidant that the avoidant had spent considerable energy preventing from being understood. In real time, this was managed. The being seen triggered the activation that the architecture was built to prevent, and the activation produced the familiar withdrawal. The seeing was, paradoxically, one of the things that made you most difficult to stay close to, because you saw too clearly, and being seen clearly by someone who might eventually leave with that seeing felt more dangerous than being seen by someone who only had access to the surface. In the absence, the management of the seeing is no longer running, and what the avoidant encounters without the management is the full recognition of what your seeing meant. Someone genuinely knew them, not the managed presentation, them, with the accurate, patient, specific attention that genuine knowing requires. And that knowing was offered freely, consistently, without the knowing being leveraged for access or weaponized in moments of conflict, or withdrawn as punishment when the relationship became difficult. The avoidant has been in relationships before. They have been in proximity to people who cared about them, who invested in them, who wanted to know them. But the quality of your knowing, the specific accuracy of it, the way it reached the actual interior rather than the presented surface, was not ordinary. And the avoidant knows this, now, in the silence. With the clarity that absence produces and presence, running alongside the management strategies, could not. Something specific happens in the avoidant's self-perception when the reckoning with your intelligence and your seeing arrives at its full depth. They begin to see themselves through your eyes, retrospectively, with the clarity of hindsight that was not available in real time when the management was running. They see the moments where your perception was accurate that they deflected, the times you named something true about the dynamic or about them, and they responded with minimization or subject change, or the particular invalidation that avoidants deploy when accurate seeing gets too close to something that needs management. They see these moments now without the management system running interference, which means they see them as what they were. Moments where you were right and they were defended. Moments where your intelligence and perception produced something genuinely insightful and the response was dismissal. Moments where you offered clarity and received confusion in return. Not because your clarity was wrong, but because receiving it clearly would have required acknowledging things the system was not prepared to acknowledge. The retrospective seeing of these moments is one of the most uncomfortable features of the avoidance reckoning, because it requires holding simultaneously the knowledge of what you offered and the knowledge of what was done with it. Holding the quality of your intelligence alongside the specific, traceable instances where that intelligence was not met with equivalent intelligence, but with the management strategy that kept the interior safe. This holding is where genuine regret lives, not the mild, abstract, I wish things had been different kind. The specific, embodied, I treated someone who deserved better as though they were less than what they were kind. That regret has texture, has specific content, has the irreversibility that makes real regret different from ordinary disappointment. And the avoidant is carrying it. The regret around your value operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and each level reveals a different dimension of what was lost. The first level is the loss of your presence, the specific, daily, irreplaceable experience of being around someone whose quality of existence elevated the texture of ordinary life. Not through grand gestures, through the ordinary, continuous, entirely reliable quality of being the specific person you are. The conversations that went somewhere. The understanding that arrived without needing to be laboured toward. The specific ease of being with someone whose intelligence and warmth created an environment in which the avoidant's own best interior had more room to surface. This level of the regret is the most accessible. It is the level the avoidant can acknowledge to themselves earliest, because it does not yet require examining their own behaviour. It is about the loss rather than about what produced it. The second level is the recognition of rarity. This level arrives later and hits harder. It is the specific, uncomfortable recognition that what you provided, the particular combination of intelligence and genuine seeing and the quality of love you brought, is not replaceable by the ordinary accumulation of new connections. That the search for someone who approximates what you were does not produce the approximation. That what you were was specific in a way that the general category of good partner cannot capture. This recognition produces a particular quality of regret, not just for the loss of something good, but for the loss of something that cannot be replicated. The avoidant begins to understand that the thing they managed as affordable to lose was, in the full honest accounting, not affordable at all. The third level is the hardest, the level of behavioural accountability. The recognition, specific and unavoidable once the first two levels have run their course, that what was done, not circumstance, not incompatibility, not the general difficulty of the relationship, but the specific choices and behaviours of the avoidant is what produced the loss. That the person who was smart enough to deserve better and valuable enough to be genuinely irreplaceable was treated, in the daily texture of the relationship, in ways that did not reflect that worth. This level is where the regret becomes transformative in its potential. Not guaranteed to produce change, regret without the work that addresses the underlying architecture is just painful, not reformative, but containing the necessary precondition for genuine change. The specific, behavioural, honest accounting of what was done and what it cost someone who deserved better. What does the avoidant actually do with this regret in the early stages of it? For the most part, they do not do anything visible. This is consistent with everything about how the avoidant processes internal experience, inwardly, without announcement, in the private processing that happens in the spaces between other things. What they do internally tends to follow a pattern that is worth understanding. First, the regret is noticed, felt, allowed to be what it is without being immediately processed into a narrative that makes it more manageable. This first noticing is often the most uncomfortable moment because the avoidant, whose entire architecture is organised around making internal experience manageable, finds the unmanaged quality of genuine regret, its specificity, its weight, its refusal to be summarised into something less costly, unfamiliar, and difficult. Second, the management strategies attempt their usual work: minimisation, reframing. The construction of a narrative in which the behaviour that produced the regret was reasonable given the circumstances. This phase is where many avoidants get temporarily stuck, cycling between the genuine regret and the management strategies that attempt to neutralise it, without either the regret being fully felt or the management succeeding in suppressing it. Third, in avoidants who are developing genuine self-awareness through this process, the management fails sufficiently that something more honest becomes available. Not the full dissolution of the defence. That is a longer, more supported process than unilateral internal reckoning can produce, but a genuine, even if partial, acknowledgement of what happened, of what it cost, of what you deserved that was not given. This third stage is where the regret begins to be felt as information rather than simply as pain, as something that is pointing at something worth examining, as the specific psychological signal that says, this matters, and its mattering deserves attention rather than management. Here is what the avoidant is realizing about your intelligence specifically that goes beyond the general appreciation of it. They are realizing that you understood things about them that they had not yet understood about themselves. This is a particular kind of intelligence, not the kind that impresses through knowledge or through the performance of insight, but the kind that produces accurate understanding of the interior experience of another person. The empathic, perceptive, genuinely attentive intelligence that sees not what someone presents, but what is actually there. You had this about the avoidant. In the relationship, consistently, you saw the loneliness inside the self-sufficiency, the hunger inside the distance, the tenderness inside the managed exterior, the specific, genuine, rarely shown to anyone qualities that the avoidant worked to keep from being visible. You saw them and you stayed, not despite what you saw, because of it, because what you saw was worth staying for, was worth the difficulty of loving someone whose architecture resisted being loved, was worth the daily renegotiation of your own reaching with the knowledge of what the reaching was running up against. This quality of seeing, the specific intelligence of knowing someone truly and choosing them specifically, is what the avoidant is now recognizing as the most valuable thing you brought. More valuable than any of the other dimensions, because it is the rarest, because it required the most of you to maintain, because it was offered with a consistency and a genuineness that the management strategies are now, in retrospect, revealed to have been thoroughly unworthy of. You knew them better than most people in their life knew them, better, possibly, than they knew themselves in certain moments. And what was offered in return was management. The distance between those two things is the specific content of the deepest regret the avoidant is currently carrying. Something important needs to be named about what the avoidant's regret does not mean, because the temptation to interpret the regret as an implicit request, as the emotional preparation for a return that just needs the right conditions to become explicit, is strong, and the temptation deserves honest address. Regret is real. What the avoidant is carrying is genuine. The recognition of your value, the specific accounting of how you were treated versus how you deserve to be treated, the quiet, management-resistant weight of understanding what was lost. All of it is real. Regret is also not transformation. It is the recognition that precedes the possibility of transformation, if transformation is undertaken. But the recognition and the undertaking are separate events that do not automatically follow each other. Many people carry genuine regret for genuine damage done to genuinely valuable people, and do not do the work that would produce different behaviour in subsequent connections. The regret is felt. It is real. It does not, by itself, produce the architectural change that would make a different outcome possible. This matters for you because the natural response to learning that someone regrets how they treated you you is a reopening of the door, an availability to the return, a willingness to try again on the basis of the regret's genuineness. The regret's genuineness is not the right criterion. The only relevant criterion is behavioural evidence, sustained, consistent, demonstrated over time rather than declared in a moment, that what produced the regret has been genuinely examined and actually changed. Regret without that evidence is feeling, real feeling, worth acknowledging and receiving, not worth reorganising your life around. What does this reckoning change in the avoidant, even if it does not produce immediate visible transformation? It changes their self-understanding, specifically and permanently. The avoidant who has reached the genuine reckoning with what you were and how they treated you does not emerge from it with the same self-narrative intact. The story that said the distance was reasonable, the management was appropriate, the behaviour was justifiable given the circumstances, that story has developed specific, large, evidence-based holes that the reckoning has made it impossible to fully reclose. This changed self-understanding is not nothing. It is, in fact, the most significant thing the relationship produces in the long-term trajectory of the avoidance development. Not the relationship while it was running, though the relationship provided the experience that made the reckoning possible. The aftermath, the silence, the specific process of encountering the full weight of what was lost and what was done in the relationship that produced the loss. The avoidant is different for having loved you and lost you and reckoned with the specific accounting of both. Not transformed, not healed, not ready, necessarily, to offer a different relationship than the one they offered before, but different, carrying knowledge about themselves and about what genuine value looks like when it is in front of them that they did not carry before. That knowledge belongs to them now. It was produced in part by you, by what you brought and what they could not fully receive, and what the not receiving eventually, inevitably, cost. For you, the knowledge that this reckoning is happening, or has happened, or will happen, is worth receiving as what it is: confirmation, not of a future, not of what is owed to you, or coming to you, or being prepared for you. Confirmation of the past, of the specific, accurate, honestly earned knowledge that what you brought to that relationship was real and significant and worth the grief it cost you to lose. The avoidance regret is the outside confirmation of what you should have been able to know from the inside without requiring it. You were smart, you were valuable, you saw clearly and loved generously and brought your full self to something that deserved full self bringing. You did this not because the outcome was guaranteed, but because it was true, and you are someone who operates from truth rather than from outcome management. That quality, the willingness to bring your actual self to things that matter, regardless of whether the bringing is met with equivalent offering, is not a vulnerability that the avoidant dynamic exposed. It is one of your most significant strengths. The specific strength that makes you the kind of person whose loss registers in the interior of someone who was built not to register losses. You registered deeply, specifically, in the precise, management-resistant, reckoning-producing way of someone whose value was extraordinary enough to defeat even the most sophisticated containment system eventually. Not in real time, in the quiet, in the specific, honest, avoidant interior silence that eventually reveals everything the management was working to keep contained. You are there, in that silence, being recognised, finally, fully, as exactly what you always were.